Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The wildlands are completely barren, so they absorb soul power from the souls they collect. Of course, they also thirst for spiritual energy, so whenever cultivators go into their lands, they try to capture them to drink their blood and absorb the power it contains. The barbaric savages have been our enemies since ancient times, and are always trying to get closer to the heaven-span sea to get spiritual energy. Our job is to keep them out. Zhao Tianzhao seemed a bit surprised at how Bai Xiaochun had suddenly turned pale in the face, but didn't think too much of it. That's why the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect built 3 cities between the heaven-span sea and the Great Wall itself, to keep out the savages and the vengeful souls. Worried that Bai Xiaochun needed more than just a general introduction, he continued, in a few days, we'll disembark, and arrive at the first city. It's called East Sea City, and has strong spiritual energy. Obviously, it's the safest location behind the Great Wall. The further you get from East Sea City, the weaker the spiritual energy gets. The second city is called World City, where a large military force is garrisoned. It can be considered a transfer hub on the way to the Great Wall itself, but is also a major line of defense. By this point, Bai Xiaochun had suppressed his terror at the thought of being eaten alive, and was listening carefully to all the new details Zhao Tianzhao was providing. Beyond World City, the spiritual energy gets even weaker, until you reach the Great Wall itself. That's the location of the third city, which is simply named Great Wall City. That is where the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect's most terrifying, steel-veined cultivators are stationed. Any one of those cultivators can be viewed as a god of death. Even I wouldn't dare to provoke any of them. As soon as Zhao Tianzhao mentioned Great Wall City, his eyes shone with respect and passion. Those cultivators form an army which is called the Hall of Steel Veins. They are the true defenders of the Great Wall, and are at constant war with the wildlands savages. Of course, the casualty rate among them is very high. According to what I've heard, the Hall of Steel Veins is broken up into 5 legions. Anyone who achieves the rank of captain in one of those armies will be very famous upon returning to the sect. After all, such a person would be backed by the Hall of Steel Veins, which surpasses even the Devas. After all, the Hall of Steel Veins is the only hall in the sect personally overseen by the demigod patriarch. Bai Xiaochun continued to nod in response to everything he was hearing, and couldn't help but think that the name of the Hall of Steel Veins was particularly impressive. As for me, Zhao Tianzhao continued, my first goal is to go take a look at the wildlands, maybe get some experience, and then join the Hall of Steel Veins. After that, I'll make some impressive military contributions and fight to reach the rank of colonel. 1. In Chinese, the names of these military ranks make it clear how many soldiers are under the command of a given rank. A captain leads 100 men, and a colonel leads 1,000. The details about the ranks will be recorded in the glossary for future reference. Included in the info on the glossary is a super minor spoiler in terms of a lower rank that isn't mentioned in this chapter, but will come up fairly soon. Huh? Bai Xiaochun said, looking in surprise at Zhao Tianzhao. For some reason, it seemed to him like Zhao Tianzhao was essentially talking about putting himself right in the path of death itself. Zhao Tianzhao clasped Bai Xiaochun's shoulder again, and his eyes were warm as he continued, the only place where a diva is stationed is in Great Wall City itself. Actually, one of the purposes of this journey is for my master to relieve Senior Zhou from his position there. For the next 100 years, my master will be stationed on the Great Wall, tasked with repelling any invasions. Although Zhao Tianzhao was actually older than Bai Xiaochun, the recent events caused him to view him as a very close friend. Zhao Tianzhao didn't have very many friends, and once he made one, that person was a brother for life. Xiaochun, getting a diva soul is only a secondary goal for me. My main purpose is to get into the Hall of Steel Veins. But you're different. You need to fight hard to get one of those diva souls. Remember, there are a lot of souls in the wildlands. Every living entity that dies in the lands of Heavenspan ends up there, as long as their soul isn't destroyed. They travel along the underworld river all the way through the wildlands, which is one reason why the wildlands represent death and hell. By this point, Zhao Tianzhao's voice was so low that he was clearly talking about secret matters, things that could not be spread to outsiders. And yet, fearing that Bai Xiaochun might end up pursuing the wrong path, he decided to clarify things a bit more. Because souls have been building up there for years and years, it can be stated with certainty that there are definitely some diva souls there. Unfortunately, they only appear once every few thousand years, and are as rare as phoenix feathers or Qilin horns. According to my master's calculations, the number of diva souls that exist in all the wild lands can probably be counted on 2 hands. Furthermore, the number of people who have used diva souls to become a heaven-down nascent soul expert are even fewer than that. There is only one, the celestial. Bai Xiaochun had often wondered exactly how many diva souls there could be in the wildlands, so this new information left him quite shocked. Considering that he already had 2 diva souls, he had often wondered if he could potentially reach the legendary heaven-down nascent soul stage. However, after what Zhao Tianzhao had just told him, he realized that such a task would be far too difficult to accomplish. He had 2 diva souls in his bag, the value of which likely surpassed even his own imagination. The thought of those 2 diva souls made him think of who had given them to him. One had come from Patriarch Frigid Sect, and the other had come from Du Lingfei. So, you shouldn't try to pursue the path of the heaven-down nascent soul. It's a dream, a fantasy that could never become reality. You should aim for diva beast souls. They are rare, but are more plentiful than diva souls. According to my master's calculations, there are probably 50 or so diva beast souls in the wildlands, although nobody can be completely sure. After offering a few more warnings and reminders, Zhao Tianzhao finally left, leaving Bai Xiaochun standing there alone, looking at the distant shore growing closer and closer. We're almost there. 10 years. What am I supposed to do for 10 years? Bai Xiaochun sighed. 3 days passed by in a flash, and the battleship continued to near the shore. One afternoon, virtually all the cultivators on board spontaneously began to gather on the main deck. From there, it was possible to see an enormous green city rising up where the land met the ocean, part of which was a huge harbor. The power of spell formations filled the area, as well as the flicker of magical symbols. Waiting on the docks were quite a large number of cultivators. The ship began to slow down, and 2 hours later, the cultivators on board were close enough to see the people on the dock with their naked eye. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the huge battleship slowly came to a stop roughly 5 kilometers away from the harbor itself. At that point, 8 somber-faced nascent soul cultivators flew out from the city to receive them, followed by large numbers of core formation cultivators. Greetings, Senior Chen. Please accept our congratulations, Senior Chen. Voices rolled out like waves as Chen Hichan and the 5 nascent soul cultivators appeared. After nodding in response to the greetings, they simply flew off into the city. Some formalities were exchanged, and then Bai Xiaochun and the rest of the hundreds of starry sky Dao polarity superstars flew out over the 5 kilometers of the heavenspan sea into the East Sea City. The entire way, the core formation cultivators who had emerged from the city were sizing up the starry sky Dao polarity superstars, and made no attempt to conceal their disdain. Obviously, these were seasoned veterans who were looking at a group of new recruits. Bai Xiaochun also took the opportunity to measure up the core formation cultivators from East Sea City. It didn't take long for him to realize that, without a single exception, they all had intensely murderous auras, even those who were in the early core formation stage. These were people who were no strangers to killing, and their eyes even had a crimson tinge to them. According to what Bai Xiaochun had heard, that crimson tinge came after killing large amounts of vengeful souls. Apparently, it was the outworking of some sort of natural law, and there was no harm to it whatsoever. Furthermore, it made a person seem quite threatening. Before long, they were in the city, and unexpectedly, nobody came out to receive them. However, one of the East Sea City cultivators who was in the great circle of core formation handed everyone a command medallion. Welcome to the sect outpost. This is your one and only authentication device, so don't lose it. If you go out into the wildlands and try to come back into the Great Wall without it, you will be refused entrance. Be very careful with it. There are no official arrangements for any of you. This is a trial by fire that is set to last for 10 years. During that time, you have to go out into the wildlands at least 3 times. Make sure records are kept of any such outing. If you don't meet that requirement, then when the 10 years are up, you won't be allowed to return to the sect. Finally, let me remind yourself to take good care of yourselves. Remember, you are only allowed to stay in East Sea City for a single day. For every day beyond that in which you remain, the total length of your trial by fire will be increased by an entire month. After leaving East Sea City, be very careful to control your usage of spiritual power. With that, the man turned and flew off into the city. Bai Xiaochun was already very anxious. This unfamiliar East Sea City had actually seemed like a pretty nice place, and he had initially planned to stay here for as much of the 10-year period as possible, only to find out that he couldn't. The starry sky Dao polarity superstars exchanged glances. Obviously, everyone had their own plans and goals in this unfamiliar location, and it only took moments before people began to disperse and head off in different directions. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath as a very serious expression played out on his face. Back when he was on the eastern Heavenspan River, he had always felt as the river-defying sect were still nearby. But now, he was in a completely strange place, with virtually no familiar faces around whatsoever. It was with a very somber expression that he looked over at Song Ke and his other Dao protectors and said, "In a strange place like this, we have to stick together more than ever. Song Ke, Master God Diviner, Chen Manyao, as my Dao protectors, the time has come to show your true skill and ability." With that, he flicked his sleeve, eyes shining brightly. "For the most part, I have been the one to protect the lot of you, whether it was in Sky City or on Sky Quarter Rainbow, and even on the battleship. But now, the time has come for you to protect me. Here's the plan." Before he could finish speaking, Chen Manyao cleared her throat. "I need to leave now, Xiaochun." "Huh?" Bai Xiaochun blurted. "It's not that I don't want to stay and help you out. But, you know the situation. I want to go home." She gave him a profound look that seemed to say she didn't wish to part with him. It even contained other, unique implications. A long moment passed. Then she sighed and took a curtsying bow. "We'll meet again if destiny will have it." With that, she turned and disappeared into East Sea City. Although her departure was a bit sudden, it wasn't completely unexpected to Bai Xiaochun. He knew that her home lay beyond the Great Wall, and that one of main reasons for coming with him was because she wanted to return there. She had said as much even back in the river-defying sect. Bai Xiaochun sighed and looked over at Song Ke and Master God Diviner. Just when he was about to explain his plan to them, Song Ke snorted coldly. Looking around at East Sea City, as well as the lands beyond, he thought to himself, "This is the perfect place for me. I, Song Ke, am the type of person who likes to live in the middle of extreme danger. The more brutal a place is, the more opportunities there will be for deadly training. That is the only way to get more powerful. This is my chance to crush Bai Xiaochun 10 times over." Heart surging with heroic aspirations, and face covered with a look of utter determination, he didn't even deign to look at Bai Xiaochun as he said, "Bai Xiaochun, whether it was in the Bloodstream sect, the river-defying sect, the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, or on that battleship, I was never able to measure up to you. But this time, in this place, I will finally surpass you. This is my last opportunity, and I won't let it slip by." With that, he transformed into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. "Care," Bai Xiaochun said, his eyes wide, his body trembling. The scene which was playing out seemed very familiar. Suddenly very nervous, he looked over at Master God Diviner. "Master God Diviner, you, Junior Patriarch, I don't really want to part ways, but I've been given some assignments by the Hall of Defenders. See you in 10 years, alright?" Master God Diviner looked a bit embarrassed, but was actually not being deceptive at all. The Hall of Defenders really had given him some assignments. After blinking a few times, Master God Diviner clasped hands and bowed, then flew away. As of this point, Bai Xiaochun was left standing alone with Gongsun Wan'er. She looked over at him, smiled faintly, then left. Bai Xiaochun looked around at the enormous East Sea City, stunned. Nothing looked familiar, and he felt completely alone, and at the same time, angry. He also couldn't help but recall what had happened upon arriving at Sky City in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, how Song Ke and the others all abandoned him. "Fine, want to spread your wings? Go ahead. If you have what it takes, you can come looking for me later." He was both furious and depressed, a mixture which actually got his fighting spirit quite worked up. "I'm definitely going to live it up here, and that's when you people will realize that abandoning me for the second time was the worst mistake of your lives." Bai Xiaochun really was very angry at how everyone had just disappeared without a trace, leaving him completely unprepared. Considering what had occurred last time, he had assumed that his Dao protectors would never again abandon him. "You eat my food, drink my alcohol, use my stuff. Fine, you people just wait." Gritting his teeth, he looked around, scowling on the verge of tears as he tried to decide what to do and where to go. That was when one particular group of 6 people who had been just about to leave changed directions and headed toward the lonely Bai Xiaochun. "Xiaochun," someone called out. It was none other than Zhao Tianzhao. Bai Xiaochun turned and saw him, as well as Chen Yushan, who were flanked by 2 male cultivators and 2 female cultivators. The 2 male cultivators were the very same followers of Zhao Tianzhao who had been so impressed by Bai Xiaochun recently. As for the female disciples, Bai Xiaochun didn't recognize them, but based on what Zhao Tianzhao had told him early on about Chen Yushan, he assumed that they were the two good friends of hers who already lived in East Sea City. Elder brother Zhao, Bai Xiaochun called out. Laughing heartily, Zhao Tianzhao landed next to Bai Xiaochun and clapped him on the shoulder. What are you doing here alone? If you don't have anything else to do, why not join us? It's probably better to stick together anyway. I'm planning to go do a bit of sightseeing and eventually head out past the Great Wall. Smiling faintly, Bai Xiaochun said, I told my Dao protectors to go their own way. They have their own destinies, and I don't wish to block their paths to the future. As for me, it's only natural that I want to tackle the world on my own. Only in that way can my heart be as tranquil as the sky, and my mind as broad as the earth. That is the key to the Tao of the heavens. Chen Yushan landed next to Zhao Tianzhao, and although she was smiling as she looked at Bai Xiaochun, there was a hint of anger in her eyes. Clearly, Zhao Tianzhao had told her about all the things Bai Xiaochun had taught him. Zhao Tianzhao's two followers immediately bowed with great respect toward Bai Xiaochun, whom they didn't dare to offend in any way. As for Chen Yushan's two friends, they merely sized him up curiously. When Chen Yushan spoke, her voice was soft and pleasant. Junior brother Bai, we were just about to leave, but elder brother Zhao was worried about you, so we came back to look for you. We were planning to go exploring a bit as well, and it's always safer to travel in numbers, so why don't you join us? Bai Xiaochun very much liked what he was hearing. Zhao Tianzhao laughed and grabbed his arm, leaving Bai Xiaochun incapable of refusing no matter how much he tried. With that, the group shot up into the air and left East Sea City. As soon as they left the city, Bai Xiaochun could tell that there was a difference in the spiritual energy, but it wasn't very noticeable. After all, they were still very close to the heavenspan sea. What was noticeable was that the hard-packed soil outside the city was a blackish-violet color. It almost looked like it was suffused with countless volumes of blood, making it very sinister in appearance. They also saw many craters, one of which had turned into a lake filled with black liquid. Chen Yushan looked around at the blackish-violet lands and said, My father told me that from the time the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect was founded until now, the Great Wall has only been breached once. A huge army of wild lands savages invaded, and the resulting slaughter caused rivers of blood to flow through the lands. Bai Xiaochun already felt a bit uneasy. In addition to the odd-looking soil, there were also strange and terrifying flora and fauna. There were 25-meter-tall trees that, instead of foliage, had huge human heads growing at their tops. Any small creatures who happened to pass by the sinister-looking trees would instantly be gobbled up. At one point they happened to see a cloud of black, cottony seeds floating into the air off of a willow tree. When Zhao Tianzhao saw that, his expression flickered. Let's take the long way around, he said. Those are the larvae of blood soul ticks. If they get into your skin, they'll burrow into your body and start feasting on your blood and soul. The only thing that can stop them are city-level spell formations. We would be powerless to defend ourselves. Bai Xiaochun opened his third eye and instantly confirmed that they were indeed not floating seeds, but rather, densely packed insect larvae. Everyone was shaken, and quickly fled in the opposite direction. It took them a few days to pass by the area, and despite having avoided the tick larvae, Bai Xiaochun was still trembling in shock. Along their way avoiding the larvae, they had passed what at first appeared to be a pile of rotting bones, but was actually a flock of undead birds which stunk like carrion, and were indescribably ferocious looking. Just as the flock of undead birds seemed to notice the group of cultivators, and was preparing to attack them, a crevice opened up in the seemingly empty ground beneath them. A powerful gravitational force erupted out, and the entire flock of undead birds was sucked into the crevice. As the crevice closed up, crunching and cracking sounds filled the air. By that point, Bai Xiaochun's heart was pounding, and his face was as ashen as death. And we're still inside the Great Wall. Bai Xiaochun thought. Everything he had seen so far was giving him a much clearer understanding of this area. If things are like this inside the Great Wall, then, what is it like on the outside? The truth was that he didn't even want to know the answer to that question. The group flew along for quite a while, passing through 3 teleportation stations. Eventually, they were getting close to the halfway point across the area that was inside of the Great Wall. That was the location of World City. They had faced dangerous situations along the way, but nothing they couldn't handle. After all, the lands between East Sea City and World City were relatively safe. Occasionally, they saw other cultivators, most of whom traveled in groups of between 3 to 5. Very rarely did they ever encounter someone alone, and when they did, they were people with cold faces and vigilant expressions, who gave Bai Xiaochun's group a wide berth. There was also an exhaustion visible in their eyes that caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to grow even colder than before. This place is even more crazily dangerous than I thought it would be, he thought, heart pounding. The closer they got to World City, the more such feelings within him intensified. Time passed. As they got closer to World City, Bai Xiaochun realized that the soil around them was growing blacker, and the vegetation was becoming even more bizarre. Even the birds and the beasts were growing stranger, and more black in color. Besides all of that, the most telling change that Bai Xiaochun could sense was the spiritual energy, which was getting weaker and weaker. Zhao Tianzhao and the others in the group had a hard time adjusting to it, but it wasn't as bad for Bai Xiaochun. At the moment, the spiritual energy levels were about the same as they were back in the lower reaches. To people who were only used to the spiritual energy in the Starry Sky Dao polarity sect, it was a huge difference, but Bai Xiaochun didn't find it very shocking. A few more days went by and, at long last, they reached the second of the three cities, World City. It was different than East Sea City, enormous, like a gigantic cube made from black bricks. Black light shone out from it in all directions, and just barely visible on the walls were patrolling cultivators. Enormous magical cannons that were clearly defensive weapons could be seen on the walls, and as for the enormous stone slabs that made the bricks, they were all inscribed with sealing marks, indicating that the entire city was itself a spell formation. Although that spell formation was only partially active, it still kept the city perpetually sealed. This was the second major line of defense inside the Great Wall. If Great Wall City ever fell, then this place would serve as its replacement. There were many cultivators in the city, and the resources available were plentiful beyond belief. The truth was that, in addition to acting as a backup defense location, this place existed as a supply depot for Great Wall City. In the dim light of evening, World City looked like a hulking beast, sinister and predatory. It was the type of place that would leave someone shaken even looking at it from a distance, as if it had its own murderous aura. "That's World City up ahead," Zhao Tianzhao said. "We'll rest up a bit here and then begin the second leg of the journey. We will definitely be facing some dangerous situations on the second part of the journey, so all of you need to prepare mentally." The faces of the others in the group were extremely somber, and as for Bai Xiaochun, he was wailing inwardly. There were bones scattered about outside of the city, some of which were bleached by the sun and had clearly been laying there for a very long time. The entire area seemed very wild and desolate. Bai Xiaochun could tell that many of the bones were clearly not those of cultivators, and yet, were not beast bones either. They seemed humanoid, but much thicker and longer, as if they belonged to giants of some sort. Such bones were very resilient, and even among those which were scattered about, almost none were broken. Bai Xiaochun's heart started pounding at the implication. "Don't tell me that those are the bones of Wildlands savages from beyond the wall?" he thought. When Zhao Tianzhao noticed Bai Xiaochun looking at the bones, he said, "When the Great Wall was breached, World City was besieged. Although it happened a long time ago, these bones were intentionally left out in the open so everyone would understand the brutality of war. We cultivators pursue our Dao, but at the same time, we have to defend our sect and the world around us. We can't let the Wildlanders through to the Heavenspan Sea." With that, he and Chen Yushan flew along toward World City. Zhao Tianzhao's followers and Chen Yushan's friends went too, leaving Bai Xiaochun to be the last to catch up. "What's with all the fighting and killing?" he thought. Whatever. Now that I've seen for myself how dangerous this place is, I have to agree with Du Lingfei. I need to find a place to hole up for 10 years, then I can trade one of my diva souls for some diva beast souls." Having made his decision, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and hurried forward, keeping a somber look on his face. Although he was inwardly terrified, he obviously wouldn't let such feelings show. Quickly catching up to Zhao Tianzhao, he declared, "You're absolutely right, elder brother Zhao. We cultivators have to put our lives on the line to fight the Wildlanders." Zhao Tianzhao laughed heartily in response. Soon, they arrived outside the city gates, where their identity medallions were examined before they were allowed inside. World City seemed large on the outside, but after entering, it seemed even larger. The streets were packed with cultivators going this way and that, and yet, there was no din of conversation, almost as if no one wanted to speak out loud. Bai Xiaochun could tell that resources were definitely abundant in World City. Whether it was medicinal pills, magical items, or paper talismans, goods were available everywhere. Furthermore, the prices weren't too outrageous. In fact, many of the medicinal pills were cheaper here than they would be in other places. Another thing that stood out to Bai Xiaochun was the garrison in the city. It was packed with cultivators, all of whom radiated murderous auras, and also wore unique clothing that was decorated with a blood-colored hand. That hand pulsed with the power of a spell formation that made each and every one of those cultivators seem like the type of person who had climbed mountains of corpses and swam through seas of blood. Whenever cultivators from the garrison went out into the city, everyone else treated them with the utmost respect. Those cultivators are members of the Hall of Steel Veins, Zhao Tianzhao explained, but they're different from their compatriots in Great Wall City. These people only go beyond the walls to fight occasionally. Most of the time, they're on guard here in World City. When Zhao Tianzhao looked at the cultivators from the Hall of Steel Veins, his eyes shone with respect and anticipation. They go beyond the walls occasionally? When Bai Xiaochun thought about the fact that these people only occasionally went beyond the wall, and yet seemed completely shocking, he couldn't help but wonder what the cultivators stationed in the third city were like. As he wallowed in his anxiety, the group found an inn to stay at for the night. As for Zhao Tianzhao and Chen Yushan, they went to visit the elders in the garrison. Considering their status, that was a right that only they possessed among the group. Zhao Tianzhao invited Bai Xiaochun to come along, but after some thought, Bai Xiaochun decided that he would explore the city instead. Evening fell, and the sky turned dark. Despite that, World City was just as busy as it was during the day, and all the shops remained open. Bai Xiaochun walked along looking at the crowds and window shopping. The crowds were very quiet, even when people spoke, it was in a near whisper. It was a very strange environment, to say the least. Since everyone was either not talking, or talking in whispers, Bai Xiaochun decided that the best thing to do was follow the ancient wisdom of imitating the locals. Therefore, he tried to look as cold and aloof as possible, even a bit sinister, all in the hopes of blending into the crowd. Before long, things didn't seem as strange as they had been. Bai Xiaochun felt like he was just like everyone else, and was soon strolling around happily. After a bit of time passed, he stopped in place and looked over at one particular nearby shop. Scattered Souls Pavilion? After looking at the name of the shop, he peered inside, and saw that the walls were stacked with countless strange-looking bottles. There were also quite a few cultivators inside browsing through the bottles. Curious, Bai Xiaochun turned, headed into the shop, and picked a bottle to look at. As soon as he saw what was inside, his eyes widened. The bottle contained a mist that was at first tranquil and calm. However, as soon as he looked closely at it, the mist shrank down into the form of a face that glared out murderously at him. It was the face of a young woman, viciously contorted into a ferocious expression. A moment after it formed, it banged into the side of the bottle as if it were trying to get at Bai Xiaochun. That face was none other than a vengeful soul. It happened with no warning whatsoever, and Bai Xiaochun had been completely unprepared for such a reaction, so he couldn't hold back from letting out a yelp of surprise. Almost immediately, the surrounding cultivators looked over at him with frowns on their faces. Simultaneously, all of the other bottles in the shop began to tremble and vibrate as the mists inside of them turned into faces that looked at Bai Xiaochun with glaring eyes. To see so many vengeful souls staring at him caused Bai Xiaochun's scalp to tingle with fear. He could also hear strange noises that resembled a mixture of laughter and weeping. There were even some voices that seemed to be singing. The sounds swirled and mixed together, seemingly boring all the way down into his soul. Release me. Hey, big bro, remember me. We know each other. I've eaten plenty of little kids just like you throughout the years. Ha ha ha, bawahahaha. The voices grew louder and louder until they echoed in Bai Xiaochun's mind like thunder. At that point, a cold glow appeared in his eyes, and frigid qi began to swirl within him. His right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and he unleashed the undying hex onto his own chest. Instantly, all of the sound died away, and everything returned to normal. The vengeful souls in the bottles were still staring at him, but apparently, they could sense that they were incapable of affecting his mind, so they looked away and began to transform back into spheres of mist. The other cultivators in the shop also began to look away and returned to browsing the bottles. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and looked around, his gaze eventually coming to rest on a man in the corner of the shop. He was old, and wore a gray robe that matched the color of his hair. Hands clasped behind his back, he walked forward and smiled at Bai Xiaochun. You new here? He asked quietly. Bai Xiaochun nodded, a bit depressed as he realized that he was pretty sure he now knew why the people here didn't like to talk much. In World City and the lands beyond it, you need to keep your voice down to avoid getting tangled up with vengeful souls. The best thing to do is transmit your voice with divine sense. There are far too many vengeful souls out there. Some of them you can see with your eyes, and some not. What you see in these bottles are none other than the souls of the dead. You see, both inside and outside of the Great Wall, souls are the most valuable resource. Whether it's for cultivation, concocting medicine, or making magical items, you have to use souls. With another smile and a nod, the old man turned and walked away. Bai Xiaochun offered his thanks, and then took a bit more time to look around at the souls. What he found was that Foundation establishment level souls were the cheapest and most plentiful, with core formation souls being more expensive. He didn't see any belonging to nascent soul experts. Eventually, Bai Xiaochun left and melded back into the crowd. This time, he was even more careful than before as he walked along the moonlit streets. Eventually, he reached another shop that caused him to stop and stare. Within that shop, they were selling savages. Just as the bones outside the city had indicated, the savages looked very much like cultivators, except bigger and taller. Most of them were 3 meters tall or more, and were extremely muscular. The savages on display were packed into coffins, and had sealing marks on them rendering them immobile. There were both men and women, and each and every one of them had very impressive fleshly bodies. As Bai Xiaochun approached, he was noticed by one of the salesmen, a man with a Foundation establishment cultivation base and a waxen face. After looking Bai Xiaochun up and down, he clasped hands respectfully and quietly said, "Senior, our Wildlander servants might not be the absolute best available in World City, but they're definitely top of the line." Bai Xiaochun looked curiously at the savages, and was shocked to find that they had teeth as sharp as wild animals. "You see," continued the salesman, "even down to their teeth and bones, their fleshly bodies are very powerful, making them excellent servants. Furthermore, they've been sealed with restrictive spells, so that you can control their life or death with a single thought. They don't look like Chen Manyao at all." Bai Xiaochun thought curiously. He considered purchasing one, but in World City, the only currencies accepted were spirit stones and battle credit. Merit points were completely useless. "They're so incredibly expensive," he thought. Considering how many years the salesman had been working here, he could tell what Bai Xiaochun was thinking. Chuckling softly, he said, "Senior, I'm guessing you're relatively new to World City. Let me explain. These savages aren't really very expensive at all. Outside the Great Wall, in the cities inhabited by the savages themselves, captured Foundation establishment cultivators sell for a price 10 times as large as savages of a similar cultivation level." "What?" Bai Xiaochun said, a look of shock appearing on his face. "The savages sell cultivators out there?" "Of course," the salesman replied coolly. To the savages, cultivators from inside the Great Wall are like the most nourishing type of food available. They don't have spiritual energy out there, and inside of every cultivator is a spiritual sea. To them, cultivators are like living spirit stones. Bai Xiaochun's scalp prickled with fear. The mere thought of being captured by savages outside the Great Wall, and then sucked dry like a spirit stone, left him trembling inside and out. "This place is way too dangerous," he thought. Looking quite displeased, he left the shop, and instead of exploring the city more, went back to the inn. Before long, dawn arrived, and Zhao Tianzhao came looking for Bai Xiaochun. It was time to leave World City and head toward the Great Wall itself. They moved slower than before. The spiritual energy was getting weaker, making traveling more strenuous, and increasing the amount of time it took to recover from exertion. Furthermore, this leg of the journey was clearly more dangerous than the previous one. The lands were actually losing their black tinge, and were almost completely violet, as if they really had been soaked through and through with blood. It was the same with the water in the rivers. It was a completely shocking sight to Bai Xiaochun and the others in the group. There were mountains here and there, all of them bare of vegetation, as well as the occasional abandoned village. There were also mobs of vengeful souls that flew about, which usually had at least a few dozen that were as powerful as the core formation level. Thankfully, the vengeful souls weren't particularly aggressive. Generally speaking, they would just fly by without stopping. Even still, Zhao Tianzhao and the other kept a close eye on them, and obviously, Bai Xiaochun was even more cautious. He kept his mouth sewn shut tight, refusing to utter even a peep. Only after the vengeful souls were completely out of sight would he let out a sigh of relief. As they proceeded forward, they rarely saw any other cultivators. There were almost no signs of life in this barren wasteland, and even the flora and fauna were few and far between, and were the type that put everyone on guard. Each plant or tree they encountered seemed stranger than the last, and more ferocious. Bai Xiaochun even saw one huge tree that was literally running along the ground as it chased after a pitch-black, 9-meter-tall spiked leopard. After catching the creature, the tree devoured it alive. At one point, an enormous, undead hand shot out of a ravine to grab a passing black eagle, which it crushed into a pulp as it extracted its blood. The squishing sounds were enough to cause one's heart to prickle with shock. The strange things they were seeing far surpassed anything they had seen during the first part of the journey. The trip from East Sea City to World City had been like a romp through the park compared to this. Although they had faced some tricky situations, overall, everything had gone quite smoothly. The path from World City to Great Wall City was much more tempestuous. Whether it was the vegetation or the animals, everything was bizarre to the extreme, and of course, left Bai Xiaochun completely terrified. Even Zhao Tianzhao, with his incredible cultivation base and extraordinary courage, proceeded with extreme caution. Chen Yushan seemed a bit pale in the face, and the others in the group were shaken terribly on numerous occasions. Even the slightest breeze left them jumpy. This was a very different world than the one they were used to. The spiritual energy was weak, leaving everyone feeling stifled. They even had to rely on magical devices and spirit stones to sustain flight. As for the spiritual energy within their bodies, they didn't dare to use it. In fact, to prevent it from seeping out, Zhao Tianzhao magically sealed himself. Everyone else took similar actions. Of course, Bai Xiaochun had taken such precautions much earlier. Although sealing one's own body would slightly reduce one's spiritual senses, it would solve the problem of leaking spiritual energy. That was important in a place where spiritual energy was scarce, and one was essentially adrift alone, unconnected to heaven and earth. That method was useful for solving the problem of spiritual energy leakage, but did nothing to alleviate the danger. Whether it was because of the souls flying about, or the bizarre entities which inhabited these lands, they had to proceed with extreme caution. Despite their carefulness, an incident occurred about 2 months after they left World City. They were all sitting cross-legged on the magical skiff that Zhao Tianzhao had purchased, when suddenly, a terrifying howl split the air. The deafening cry pierced through the skiff's sealing shields to batter the minds of everyone on board. Zhao Tianzhao's eyes opened, and Bai Xiaochun's heart trembled. Everyone looked up in the sky to see what appeared to be clouds converging together. Within moments, they had taken the shape of an enormous beetle, fully 3,000 meters long, which quickly turned pitch black. Clearly, this 3,000-meter-long pitch-black beetle was attempting to block their path, and its intense howls caused everything in the area to shake. A wildlands cloud gyre, Chen Yushan blurted. Zhao Tianzhao's face fell, and the others in the group seemed equally shaken. The origin of wildlands cloud gyres are unclear, Zhao Tianzhao said, and no one knows exactly how they form. If I remember correctly, they can pop up anywhere in the wildlands, whether that's inside the Great Wall or outside. They have no predefined form, and can take almost any shape, even that of plants or vegetation. Clearly, this cloud gyre has taken the form of a beetle. Cloud gyres aren't really animals, they're a manifestation of the weather, and one this big will surely attract the attention of Great Wall City. Without any hesitation, he steered the flying skiff to the side in an attempt to avoid the black beetle. As the skiff veered off course, an intense sensation of danger filled Bai Xiaochun, and his heart leapt up into his throat. However, even as they tried to change directions, the 3,000-meter-long beetle stopped roaring and then looked over at them with a cold gaze. That gaze in and of itself was enough to drive Bai Xiaochun wild with fear, and send his mind spinning. Everyone else was also sweating in fear. Before anyone could react, the black beetle once again let out a deafening roar, then opened its mandibles. Instantly, a gravitational force spread out, accompanied by thunderous rumblings and screaming winds. It was almost as if the black beetle's mandibles had become a black hole. Everything began to shake, causing dust and pebbles to rise up into the air, and even distorting the clouds above. A nearby flock of vicious-looking birds screamed as they were sucked toward the beetle. The ground was shaking so hard that a hill in the area was ripped off of the ground and began to spin toward the beetle. Everyone's minds were being battered by waves of shock, and as they did their best to remain firmly attached to the skiff, their hair and garments whipped in the wind. If they weren't already being protected by the spiritual power of the vessel itself, they would have been pulled out into the air and ripped to shreds. In fact, the skiff was already twisting and distorting on the verge of breaking. From high above, it looked like the black beetle was the center of an enormous vortex sucking in everything around it, even the trees. Zhao Tianzhao, Bai Xiaochun and everyone else were extremely nervous, and didn't think for a moment about conserving spiritual energy. They immediately unleashed the full power of their cultivation bases to power the skiff as it flew out of the vortex. As the skiff struggled through the air, the spirit stones which had been placed into its power slots glittered with bright light, then turned dark and transformed into ash. The spirit stones having been fully drained, and with the extra power from the cultivation bases of the entire group, the skiff seemed to roar with rage as it pulled out of the gravitational vortex and then shot off into the distance. Behind them, the black beetle howled in rage, but didn't pursue them. Bai Xiaochun sat there in taciturn silence, his mind a blank. All of his cultivation base power was being poured into the skiff, and it was the same with everyone else. Only after they had gone all out to flee, and were some distance away, did they slow the skiff and stop near a random mountain. There, they breathed long sighs of relief, and exchanged awkward glances that were tinged with lingering fear. That Cloudgyre was at least as powerful as the great circle of the nascent soul stage. Cloudgyre. Bai Xiaochun looked over his shoulder in the direction they had fled from. He felt like he had just barely made it out of that situation with his poor little life. If the flying skiff hadn't been able to rip free from the gravitation vortex, what would have happened? There was no answer to the question. In the wildlands, Cloudgyres didn't just cause problems for Cultivator, but the savages as well. They were manifestations of the weather, not the power of humans, and nothing that entered their jaws ever came back out alive. Therefore, no one really knew what happened to the things that they consumed. I can't believe that freakish thing even exists. Bai Xiaochun said with a frown. Trying to sound comforting, Zhao Tianzhao said, with our command medallions, we should be mostly safe as long as we're careful. As long as we don't go beyond the Great Wall. Chen Yushan was a bit ashen, but she nodded. The only thing they could do in this sparsely populated land was hope that the power of the command medallions truly would keep them safe. That was what they were designed to do, considering that they were disciples of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. You sure about that? Bai Xiaochun said, scowling on the verge of tears as he pulled out the command medallion. He already regretted coming along with Zhao Tianzhao to this place. It would have been a much better idea to stay holed up in East Sea City for 10 years. Better and safer. Evening was falling. Unfortunately, draining the spirit stones to gain a burst of speed had damaged the power slots on the skiff, and they couldn't use it anymore. However, Zhao Tianzhao and his group had begun the journey well prepared. After a bit of rest, Chen Yushan produced another flying skiff, which they set up with new spirit stones and then resumed their journey. Along the way, they were even more cautious than before. They had wasted a lot of their own cultivation base power, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was very weak. Therefore, they had to use spirit stones to recover, a process which was long and difficult. 2 more months went by. During that time, they faced some dangerous situations, but passed through them all safely. Even still, the mental strain was growing. Thankfully, the slow and steady recovering process of their cultivation bases had pushed them close to their peak level. As a result, Bai Xiaochun felt a lot safer than before. At one point, Zhao Tianzhao shook his head and said, even I still can't believe that things are so dangerous inside the Great Wall. I wonder what it's like on the other side. Xiaochun, our main goal still hasn't changed. After we get to the Great Wall, we're going outside to get some experience. Are you going to join us? Bai Xiaochun looked out wistfully at the lands around them, and then shook his head. I don't think so, he replied. I think I'll explore Great Wall City a bit. The better I get to know the city, the less trouble I'll have later on. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.